I chose to carry out a science projects class with ninth graders from the public school Primer Presidente. The projects are meant to ignite scientific thought processes and to help guide the kids into having a more personal and self-constructed concept of science. Well, I worked last year on my personal project, and my personal project's purpose already was that of impacting my audience in such a way that would influence their view of how science really works and the real meaning of scientific research, investigation, and interpretations. This motivation gave me the idea to further extend the impact I could have by working with the students from Primer Presidente School. For the planning, I researched about interesting science projects that were in line with the goal of my activity. I investigated about simple, cheap ways of carrying out the experiments and set to explain the theoretical basis necessary for the project I would start with. I also gathered explanatory YouTube videos to guide the experiments. Since I was required to have the company of a school teacher every time I attended Primer Presidente School, I asked the middle school physical science teacher, John Carmichael, if he could help me out. I worked in the role of a teacher, designing the development of each class and being in charge of the classes. I worked mainly on my own since the idea for the project was very personal, but I had the assistance and collaboration that John provided by coming with me to school for every class. The outcomes of the whole experience were plenty. In the more tangible sense, the result was the kids' machines and their assembled circuits. But I think that the main outcome was not the final stage of the machines, but the knowledge that my students acquired, the many things that they learned, which I was able to see during their school science fair, in which my students elaborated on the classes and projects we did. So, quite honestly, I feel generally well satisfied with the result, mostly with the impact I believe to have achieved on the kids' concept of science. But I would have liked to have more successful machines finished as evidence of our work, since not all of them managed to complete the work on the machines. I think what I would like to improve would be two things. First of all, having the materials ready beforehand, and second, covering the theoretical part in a more spread over manner to go along with the project's development. These two things would have come in really handy. Then, what I would like to avoid would be, first of all, losing classes due to school issues or misinformation, which happened a few times, and then having classes of low productivity because of lack of attention. Well, the whole project was born from my experience and personal concept of what science is and how we should get involved in it. I also believed that I could contribute to others' experience in science by sharing with them the process of carrying out a scientific experiment or project. I was certainly challenged by having to think of myself as a new teacher or an educator. I had given private tutoring before, but the sense of responsibility for the kids' learning and their relationship with science, since this was their first scientific experience, was quite new, and I definitely consider it to have been a challenge. As for thinking differently about others, this was my first time having an actual class of students of my own. I had to think of their development, the way they think and understand better. This experience made me work not only to think about my students as such, but to actually analyze and evaluate them, to build better comprehension of their learning. My role as their teacher was essentially determined by this. Well, I enjoyed the challenges. They were sort of what make the whole thing a worthwhile experience. I mean, it's the challenges that make us grow in a sense, after all, at least that's how I see it. So I'm glad it was a challenging process, because seeing that we made it through, I can say that we all, my students as well as me, learned from it. I think the most remarkable moment to mention here would be one of the first classes, when one of my students, Matias, showed up with what was almost the complete structure of the machine I had introduced the previous class. He had made it simply remembering the instructions I gave and the way the machine looks from a video I showed them. This gave me a big wave of pride. It made me very hopeful about the prospect of finishing the project with them. A few frustrations came when I had to deal with a boyfriend and girlfriend couple of students because they essentially spent more time with each other than in the actual class. So I had to deal with this mainly by separating the class into groups and making them work that way. I think that choosing a different experiment on which to work as my first experience with them could have resulted in an easier or more productive course, but it would also have meant sacrificing some of the very enjoyable aspects and challenges that the experiment I chose did have.
I think this was a good project for the class. It was really simple as far as materials were concerned. Just a few suggestions. I'd say next time have a sample ready to facilitate the building process. Also, the circuits, including circuits, was a good idea. It seemed like the students were really interested with it, and it brought more interest to the topic of electricity in general. And also the smaller groups next time I think would be a good idea because they'll work more and they'll focus more, because with bigger groups it tends to become less focused. Then as far as the teaching went, I'd say less information over more time, because when we have long lectures about, as an introduction is fine, but for day-to-day it's too much information for them to digest at one time. And then next time to have some sort of a pre-established format or program, and maybe have prefabricated parts that you have to show them at the beginning of each day so they know exactly where they're starting and where they're finishing, and then have that sample already made of the end product so they can have some sort of an idea of where they are along the way.